Good morning. Welcome back to the Vitality Project. I'm Dr. Bob. Yesterday, we joined fully with the 12-step philosophy's diagnosis of addiction as being spiritual at its roots. But what we also did is we expanded what spirituality entails. And what we're interested in doing is transcending just a narrow view of spiritual beliefs here and wanting instead to take in the entire realm of one's subjective experience, very much in sync with what the Germans initially called spiritual science, and what we might call the study of everything that matters to us subjectively or experientially. This more expanded view of spirituality necessitates then, at a minimum, to take very seriously psychology's contributions right alongside those of the various spiritual traditions. I believe this was the initial intent of Bill W. and the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step traditions. He was very much steeped in two major influences. One was William James, the first American psychologist, and another psychologist and psychoanalyst, actually a psychiatrist, who had a huge impact on the early formation of AA, was the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who himself was the prize student of the founder of modern psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. So there you have two major influences, both of them deeply spiritual, both of them profoundly psychological, Carl Jung and William James. But I also promised yesterday to say more about spirituality itself. In my own view, one limitation of certain interpretations of the phrase spiritual problem with a spiritual solution, recall that we've talked about this as being kind of the formula within the 12-step traditions, that addiction is a spiritual problem with a spiritual solution. I think one of the limitations here is that certain interpretations of that phrase are way too narrow. And by that, I mean they exclude a serious psychological understanding of addiction. On the one hand, that's one piece. But there's one more very important misinterpretation that we also need to address, and that is this. There are multiple views of what constitutes spirituality. And here I'm speaking across all levels of human development. We understand from developmental psychology, for example, that a child will interpret any idea of God quite literally, and that many, if not most adults, don't. Now, does that mean that adults are somehow less spiritual than children? Probably not, right? It's highly unlikely. So we have to also factor into our understanding of spirituality the many different entry points, if you think of it that way, the many different entry points developmentally into any possible spiritual path. Let me give you an example. There are major spiritual traditions in the world right now, historic religions, that do not believe in any personal God. You might already be familiar with them. Buddhism is one. Another one is Taoism, T-A-O, Taoism. So if we're going to suggest that spirituality is a key to understanding and healing addiction, we're also going to need to define spirituality in a way that it doesn't exclude large numbers of people just by definition. So we're talking about spirituality on the one hand as exploring the whole subjective realm of our experience, how that might contribute to our initial addiction, how that's essential to understand in our recovery. And now we're also including another nuance, which is that if we're going to talk about spirituality as spirituality now, in terms of spiritual resources, spiritual tools, spiritual beliefs, we're going to have to define spirituality in a way that doesn't exclude as many people as many current definitions do. So what I'd like to do is invite you to come back tomorrow, because I intend to provide just exactly one such definition of spirituality. Our goal here is we want to have a definition of spirituality which is broad enough to include potentially every human being and deep enough to provide for genuine transformation, the kind of transformation that's necessary in full addiction recovery. Thanks for hanging with me now. We're going to begin applying what we've been talking about the last few posts in much more detail, and hopefully in a way that's very practical and perhaps even applies to you. I wish you a good day and appreciate you being here to support the Vitality Project. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow.